Okay, so let's continue with our next video in the practice question exercise series of the AWS Certified Developer Associate exam. So in the last video, we have covered 1 to 10 question. In this video, we are going to cover 11 to 20 question. So let's read the question number 11. A developer creates a customer managed key. So a developer creates a customer managed key for multiple AWS user to encrypt the data in image and S3. So if we have to encrypt the data, you have to create some encryption key, right? So the developer created that for multiple AWS. The developer configure simple notification service to publish a message if the deletion is scheduled. So let's suppose because the developer has created the key, so the developer configured some kind of a configuration. If someone delete that key, it should send some notification email. The developer need to preserve any SNS message that cannot be delivered. So when any notification is being sent, uh, sometimes it sent properly, sometimes it did not send properly. So what the developer wants is if the message unable to deliver, right, it should stored somewhere. So they want to preserve it should store somewhere so that it can be reprocessed. So which of the service like the developer should use? Shall they use simple email service? But no, because simple email service is not a storage service, because the developer need to preserve undelivered message, right? Lambda, no. Simple queue service, so definitely yes, because queue service is just to hold the messages, right? Cloud watch alarm, no. So C is the correct answer. Question number 12. A developer needs to deploy an application on AWS Elastic Beanstalk for a company. So some application needs to deploy on Elastic Beanstalk. An application consists of a single Docker image. So what application contains a Docker image? The company automated continuous integration and CI/CD process which builds the Docker image and pushes the image to the Docker container registry. So application, so the developer deploy wants to deploy an application, and application contains a Docker image. So it contains a Docker image, not a Docker file. And that Docker image already pushed to the Docker registry using their automated process. How should the developer deploy the application to Elastic Beanstalk? So now the image exists on the Docker registry. So now the developer wants to deploy that particular application image to the Elastic Beanstalk. How they are going to do that? So first option is create a Docker file, configure Elastic Beanstalk. So this looks wrong, because why should we create a Docker file when we already have the image, right? Why we are again going to build the image and push to the Docker registry, right? When we already they already build the Docker image for us and they already push. So this looks wrong. Create a Docker compose file looks correct, because in the Docker compose file we can mention the image URL from where you want to pull the Docker image. So this looks correct. Create a zip file that contains the Docker image looks wrong, because if you put the Docker image, you can't put the Docker image into the zip file. You can put the Docker file right in the Docker image. Create a Docker file, run the Elastic CLI EB local run command. So this is the local run command. This looks wrong because you want to deploy into the AWS. You don't want to run to the local. So correct answer is B. Question number 13. A company is using AWS Code Deploy for all production deployment. So Code Deploy is like AWS service to deploy something to the AWS services. A developer has an Elastic Container Service application that uses the Code Deploy default ECS all at once configuration. So Code Deploy is doing some kind of deployment over the ECS application, and how the deployment is done is using some configuration, which that configuration is called as Code Deploy default ECS all at once. All right. The developer need to update the production environment in increment of 10% until the entire production environment is updated. So currently the configuration is set as ECS all at once. What is ECS all at once? So if your application is already running in production or any other environment or on ECS, and you want to deploy the new version, it is going to overwrite everything in a single go, which leads to the downtime for the user, right? ECS all at once. But the developer wants to update the production environment so that only 10% of the entire uh, production environment is updated, and then 10%, and then 10% basically in increment order. So which configuration we need to use? ECS code deploy default ECS can read 10% 5 minutes. So what is it? Can read 10% 5 minutes. Can read 10% 5 minutes. Can read means 10% and 5 minutes means like first you are going to deploy the 10%, which looks fine. Then wait for the 5 minute. Okay. Then deploy the remaining 90%. But this is not something which we want. We want first deploy 10%, then remaining 10%, then remaining 10%. We don't want just in the first place 10% and then remaining 90% together. No. ECS linear 10%. This looks correct. Linear 10% means like first deploy 10%, then 10%, then 10%. This looks correct. One at a time. So this looks wrong. Code lambda. So this is totally wrong because we are deploying to the ECS. We are not deploying to the lambda, right? So the answer is B. Question number 14. A company is using AWS Elastic Beanstalk to deploy a three-tier application. So again, the company is using Elastic Beanstalk to deploy some kind of application. A company uses so three-tier application basically front end, business logic, and the back end. And company uses RDS database as a database tier. Okay. Uh, Company wants to decouple the DB instance from the Elastic Beanstalk environment. Okay. So like when you are going to spin up the Elastic Beanstalk and you want the database, so within the Elastic Beanstalk, like let's suppose the RDS has been spinned up. All right, but what now the company wants is company wants that like my application should be different, database should be different. So both should be the two different services. They want to decouple that. How they are going to perform this action? What two step they will take to do this? Create a new Elastic Beanstalk environment that connect to the DB instance. This looks wrong because why you are going to create a new environment, right? You want to decouple the existing environment. Create a new DB instance from a snapshot of your previous DB instance. Definitely correct because if you want to decouple, so it means first you need to create a different database instance, right? And then you want to connect your application to the database instance. So this looks correct. Then use Elastic Beanstalk CLI to decouple wrong. You use the AWS CLI to decouple wrong. Modify the current Elastic Bean environment to connect to the DB instance. Yes, correct. So only two options correct, B and E. What you have to do is you have to create a different database, and then you have to update your environment variables like username, URL, password, so that now this time it is going to correct your new DB instance. So in this way you are going to decouple. So answer is B and A. But if you see, people says A and B, which looks wrong as per me. And some people say BE, some people say AC, some people say other. So that's why like we are covering all these questions because here you are the questions given like even the answers are given, but which answer is correct? It is difficult to analyze, all right? Because some people say some other option, some people say some other option. So that's why we are like covering this video. So correct answer is B and E. So even if you go to the discussion tab, and here I have like uh, explain everything B and E. Okay. Question number 15. A company has a point of sale devices across thousands of retail shop that synchronize sale transaction with centralized system. So there are like thousands of retail shops, and there are some device at every retail shop that synchronize sales transaction. So at every shop, there is some device placed, and people come and did some transaction. The system, and when they did some transaction, all the transaction went at some centralized place. All right, they are going to store at one place. That system includes an Amazon API gateway API that expose the Lambda function. So you have the API gateway, and after that API gateway, you have the Lambda function. The Lambda function process the transaction and store the transaction into the RDS. So how they are synchronizing it? So it is calling some API, That API is calling the Lambda function, and the Lambda function it's storing the transaction to the RDS. The number of transaction increases rapidly during the day and is near zero at night. So they said like what they have observed during the daytime, when the store is open, it's increases, but during the night it's near to zero because most of the stores are closed, right? How can developer increase this elasticity? Migrate RDS to Aurora. So like why should we migrate, right? Uh, Migrate, so totally wrong. Create a simple queue service, publish transaction to the queue, set the queue to invoke the Lambda function, turn on enhanced fan out. So this looks half correct to me because you could see the number of transaction has been increases, right? So number of transaction has been increases. So if the number of transaction has been increases, there will be load on the database, and maybe some database transaction might fail or throttled. So you have to hold some transaction in some buffer space like queue. So it looks correct. Create a simple queue service, right? Publish those transaction to the queue first, and then invoke the Lambda function, right? And then like so they said turn on enhanced fan out. So in Lambda function I don't think you can turn the enhanced fan out. And let's read the option number D. Create a simple queue service, looks correct. Publish transition to the queue, which looks correct. Set the queue to invoke the Lambda function, yes. Now set the reserved concurrency of the Lambda function to be less than the number of database connection. So D is the correct answer, because if you enable the enhanced fan out means like more number of connections. So more number of connection, more throttling. But here you want to set some concurrency so that, let's suppose you have only 10 database connection. If 20 lambda is going to be triggered, or lambda trigger 20 times, uh, it is it is going to be transition will be throttled, or maybe it's going to be failed. So you have to take care of that as well. So option D is correct. Even if you see people say C 7%, but D is correct. Question number 16. A developer is writing an AWS Lambda function. Okay, so there is one developer who is writing AWS Lambda function, and Lambda function need to access items that are stored into the Amazon DynamoDB. So Lambda function code is trying to access a DynamoDB table. What is the most secure way? So what is the most secure way? If one service in AWS trying to access the another service, it should access using IAM role. That's it. So create an IAM user, totally wrong, because it should be accessed using role or policy, you can say. Add a resource based policy to the DynamoDB. This looks correct, because you can add the policies at two places, one at the source, one at the destination. So they said resource based policy. So in the Amazon DynamoDB you can add the resource based policy, and that policy is going to be decided which AWS service is going to can access me. Create an IAM policy that allows access to the DynamoDB table. So this is the another option. Like you can create a policy that is going to access the DynamoDB table, and that policy you can attach to the Lambda function. So this is the most relevant and most general approach which we are going to do. Generally, you are going to create a role rather than attaching a resource-based policy, because this is not a flexible. Because now you create a resource-based policy. Let's suppose in future some another AWS will want to access, then you have to update the resource-based policy of the DynamoDB. Create a DAX cluster are wrong, so option C is correct. Question number 17. A developer is implementing user authentication and authorization. So whenever in the exam now or in the question you read user authentication and authorization, so quickly one AWS service should come into your mind, that is the AWS Cognito. Right, a developer is implementing user authentication authorization of web application that is hosted on Amazon EC2. So one application, web application is hosted on Amazon EC2. So what developer want is, if anyone trying to access their web application, it should authenticate and authorize. The developer need to ensure that the user credentials are encrypted and secure when they are stored or transmitted, because when the user is trying to log in, they are logging using some username and password. Right, the developer wants they should be like secure, stored or transmitted. What the solution? Activate web server module, authenticate, authorization of the use HTTP basic authentication. This looks wrong, because HTTP is not a secure. HTTPS is secure. Deploy custom authentication over HTTP. Again, HTTP, so this we can eliminate it. So in the examiner, try to eliminate the options. Use Amazon Cognito to configure a user pool and Cognito API to authenticate. This looks correct because Cognito is one of the AWS service which has only this purpose. Create IAM user. So this looks wrong because IAM users are within the AWS, but generally the web application is being accessed by the external users. All right, so this looks wrong. So option C looks correct. Question 18. A company that has multiple offices use an Amazon DynamoDB to store employee payroll. So there is one company who has multiple offices and they are using Amazon DynamoDB table and they are going to store the employee payroll information. So maybe employee work in which company, what is the salary structure, all these things. So what are the item attributes? Employee name, definitely correct. Office, which office, how much daily hour that particular employee is working. Okay. The most frequent used query. So they said the most frequent used query extract reports of an alphabetic subset of employee for a specific office. So if you just read this line, right? So what is the query? Query is for a specific office. It means that is a where clause. Where clause means that is a primary key. And alphabetic subset of employee. Alphabetic subset means you have to sort some kind of employees. So how you are going to design your primary key? So partition key on the office identifier and sort on the employee name looks correct because office should be the primary key because they are trying to access those employees specific to the office. So office should be the primary key. And then they are also like doing some kind of sorting, alphabetic sort of employees. So the sort key should be employee name. Partition key of employee name looks wrong. Partition, just the partition key employee name wrong. Partition key on the office name wrong because if you just create the partition key, what about the sorting? You have to create the sort key as well. So option A looks correct. Question number 19. A company hosts a microservice application that uses Amazon API gateway. So there is a microservice application which consists of API gateway, and then after the API gateway you have the AWS Lambda, and after the Lambda you have the simple queue service, and then DynamoDB. One of the Lambda function adds message to the simple queue, a FIFO queue, FIFO queue. When a developer checks the application log, the developer finds a duplicate item in DynamoDB table. Okay, so what is the issue? Like some transition is coming, and that transition is routed through this path from API gateway to Lambda, Lambda to Q, Q to DynamoDB. And when the developer check the DynamoDB table, they find duplicated item. All right, so the items were inserted by another polling function that process message from the queue. What is the most likely cause? A write operation on the DynamoDB is being throttled. Wrong, because if there is throttling happening, the transition is going to be like maybe failed. It will least likely to cause the duplicate. The SQS queue delivered the message to the function more than once. Looks wrong because here it is mentioned FIFO queue. So FIFO queue makes sure that exact once delivery. So if it is making sure only one delivery should be happen, then how the FIFO queue is sending two messages? Wrong. API gateway duplicated the message in the SQS queue. Wrong. Even if API gateway duplicated the message to the SQS queue, API gateway is not going to duplicate the message to the SQS. The polling function timeout is greater than the queue visibility timeout. This looks correct because here they have mentioned it is being inserted by the another polling function. So polling function timeout. So let's suppose uh, there is a one in the simple queue service you have some consumer. So and when the message is going to be published into the queue, there is a visibility timeout. So let's put the visibility timeout is 3 seconds. All right. So when the message is going to become there, only for the first consumer it is visible for 3 seconds, and when it is visible for the first consumer, that message is not visible to the another consumer. All right. So let's suppose the first consumer is trying to poll the message. Poll means trying to read the message. All right. and it takes 5 minutes or maybe 5 seconds. So but till 3 seconds the message will be visible. Message will not be visible to the other users, only visible to the particular. But as soon as the 4 second will come, it will visible to the other consumer as well. All right. But polling function is taking more time. So because it is taking 5 seconds and the message visibility is set to 3 seconds, after 3 seconds it is visible for the other consumer. And as soon as it is visible to the other consumer can process it. If the other consumer also process it, then it will be the duplicate. So the answer will be D. Question number 20. A development team has been used a builder server, sorry. A development team has been using a builder server that is hosted on a major EC2 instance to perform some kind of a build operation and deployment for the last 3 months. Okay. The EC2 instance IAM profile use an IAM role that contains administrative access management. So they are hosting some kind of server on EC2, and and from there they are performing some kind of a build and deployment from the last 3 months. But the role IAM role which attached to the EC2 is the administrative access, which ideally looks wrong. All right. So that's why the development team wants to replace this policy, because administrative access is very wider access. We generally should not give that wider access. So that's why the development team wants to replace the policy with the required permission. So what is the fastest way to create an IAM policy? So they said uh, currently it has administrative access. That's why it's running. But now the development team wants to only allow those policy or rules which is just required. Then how the developer know which policies should I add? Because currently it is administrative, so that's why everything is working. Create a new IAM policy based upon service that the build server deployed or updated in the last 3 months. So this looks correct, because we have to create a new policy, because we have to replace, so you have to create a new policy, and in that policy you have to like give which permissions. Because we have the last three, it's running from last 3 months, so we will check the last 3 months. Okay, what action it has taken, so we are going to do that. uh, that server deployed based on the services. But how you are going to know which services it has deployed in the last 3 months? Something we have to do that. Let's read another option. Create a new IAM policy looks correct, includes all actions that, so it has based upon the services that the build server, which still again wider. It is on the actions, includes all action that CloudTrail recorded. So because CloudTrail is going to record all the action, like whether it's what action is uh, the particular build server is performing. So this looks correct to me, because what we can do is we can simply go to the CloudTrail, and we will filter for last 3 months. Okay, what action has been performed, and all those action can be added to the new IAM policy, and that IAM policy can be attached to the EC2. Create a new permission boundary that denies all access. This looks wrong. We don't want to deny the access. We want to give the access. Create a new IAM policy by using Amazon Athena to query Amazon S3 bucket that contains AWS CloudTrail. This looks wrong, because why we should first push CloudTrail logs to the S3 bucket and then query using an Athena? Very complicated. Why can't we just directly using see the logs into the CloudTrail? So option B looks correct. So that's it. That's the end of the video, and you can also go through this question. In the next video, we are going to cover the next 10 question. So that's it.